Friends, здравствуйте, привет, мои дорогие друзья. So today we continue learning Russian, and today I'll explain to you everything about still one very famous and common Russian verb. If you try to practice your Russian speech, your skills in Russian language, of course you use this verb every day. And today I'll explain to you everything about this verb. This verb sounds like иметь. Иметь we translate into English like have or had. Yes, have or had. And how native Russian speakers use this verb in the present tense, future tense, past tense, and so on. Of course, we can change our sentence with this verb. It depends on the genders, I mean masculine, feminine, and so on. And of course, it depends on the, if you're talking about one thing, two things, and so on. And today I'll explain to you everything, and I will use very simple and easy examples you to understand everything about this verb. So let's go. How native Russian speakers use this verb in the present tense? Present tense. Yes, and I have. How we can translate this sentence into Russian? I have we translate into Russian like у меня есть. У меня есть. I have. У меня есть. But first of all, you should know that if we need to translate this sentence, I have, exactly, literally, we can translate it like я имею. Я имею. Exactly, if we're talking about literally translations. Я имею. But you should know that native Russian speakers don't use this version. Of course, we use, but so seldom, so rarely. And I advise you to use exactly this version, like у меня есть. I have something, yes, and we can continue this sentence. I have, у меня есть. Don't use this version. Of course, you can find this version in different Russian books. For example, that's why I need to warn you that you can find this kind of version of the verb like я имею. But in your Russian speech, please use exactly this version like у меня есть, because native Russian speakers mostly use exactly this version. У меня есть. Next, you have. You have we translate like у тебя есть. У тебя есть. У тебя есть. And of course we can find this kind of version like ты имеешь. But one more time, native Russian speakers don't use this version. Ты имеешь. Of course they use this version, but very seldom and rarely. I advise you to use exactly this, because I, as a native Russian speaker, and other native Russian speakers use exactly this version. У тебя есть. Next, he has. У него есть. У него есть. And of course we can face this kind of version like он имеет, if we need to translate it literally. Yes? Он имеет. But use exactly this version. У него есть. У него есть. Next, she has. У нее есть. У нее есть. У нее есть. Or она имеет. But one more time, use exactly this version. У нее есть. Next, they have. У них есть. У них есть. У них есть. Or они имеют. This version we use very rarely and seldom. I advise you to use exactly this version. У них есть. And next, you have. If we can tell something for other people, for some people. У вас есть. У вас есть. Okay? Or, for example, we can, if we need to translate it literally, we can say like вы имеете. But really, we don't use this version like вы имеете. More often we use this version like я имею, ты имеешь in different official situations, official documents, and so on. In ordinary Russian speech we use exactly this version, like у меня есть, у тебя есть, у него есть, у нее есть, and so on. У вас есть, and so on. Yes, and let's give you different examples. For example, I have a car. I have a car. We translate into Russian like у меня есть машина. У меня есть машина. I have a car. У меня есть машина. Or I have a house. У меня есть дом. Or I have an apartment. У меня есть квартира. And so on. Есть? I have a car. У меня есть машина. Next. Like a question. Do you have a family? Do you have a family? У тебя есть семья? У тебя есть семья? Do you have a family? У тебя есть семья? Or do you have a car? У тебя есть машина? Do you have a house? У тебя есть дом? У тебя есть квартира? And different examples. Next. He has a computer. He has a computer. У него есть компьютер. У него есть компьютер. У него есть компьютер. Next example. She has the boyfriend. She has the boyfriend. У нее есть парень. У нее есть парень. If we use exactly у него, of course we can say like у него есть девушка. I mean, he has a girlfriend. У него есть девушка. Yes, but if you're talking about her, у нее есть парень. And in this situation is very interesting. Why? If you want to use exactly this sentence, if you're talking about boyfriend, girlfriend, you should know one very interesting rule in Russian language. Because if we're talking about like у нее есть парень, she has a boyfriend, we need to understand that this sentence we use for young people, exactly young people. Or if we're talking about girlfriend, we use this sentence like у нее есть парень or у него есть девушка when we're talking about young people. Why? Because if we're talking about old man, old woman, old people, we should use another Russian word. This word sounds like спутник. Спутник. У нее есть спутник. Why? Because in Russian language it sounds very strange if you use this sentence like у нее есть парень for older woman. For old woman. If you want to use this sentence for old woman, you should use exactly this Russian word спутник. Спутник. У нее есть спутник. Or if you're talking about him, yes, у него есть, he has a girlfriend. If you're talking about old man, you should use this word like спутница. He has a girlfriend. У него есть спутница. Спутница. Yes? Just remember it because it's very important if you want to sound like a real native Russian speaker. Okay? And go next. For example, they have money. They have money. У них есть деньги. У них есть деньги. They have money. У них есть деньги. And still one example. У нас, we have the tickets. We have the tickets. У нас есть билеты. У нас есть билеты. Yes, by the way, I didn't indicate it here about it. For example, if we want to use this verb for this word like we have, yes, we have we need to use exactly this version like у нас есть, у нас есть. Or another example, but we use this example very, very rarely and seldom, like мы имеем. Don't forget that this version we use very rarely and very seldom. Use exactly this version like у нас есть. Okay, one more time. У меня есть машина, у меня есть дом, у меня есть квартира. У тебя есть семья, у тебя есть семья, у тебя есть машина, у тебя есть дом, у тебя есть квартира. У него есть компьютер, у него есть компьютер. О, у него есть девушка. If you're talking about young man, young people. О, у него есть спутница, у него есть спутница. If you're talking about old people. У нее есть парень, у нее есть парень. One more time, if you're talking about young people. Or у нее есть спутник, у нее есть спутник. If you're talking about old people. Next, у них есть деньги, у них есть деньги. Or у нас есть билеты, у нас есть билеты. So I hope you understood about it, everything, if you're talking about present tense. And now we will talking about future tense. Future tense. Future tense. And here you should understand one thing. If you're talking about Russian verb иметь, and if you want to use this Russian verb иметь in the future tense, you should understand one rule. What's the rule? In the future tense, we use this verb in only one way. One way. This way sounds like, for example, I will have. I will have. We translate this sentence into Russian like у меня будет. У меня будет. I will have. У меня будет. Just remember. For example, do you remember when I told you, explaining to you a very common and famous Russian verb like бегать? Бегать. We translate into English like run. Yes. And this verb бегать we use in the future tense for two ways. Like я побегу or я буду бегать. You see that in the future tense, this Russian verb бегать I use for two versions, two types, two ways. But if we're talking about Russian verb иметь, I mean have or had, we use only one way. У меня будет. У меня будет. What I mean? One more time. I will have. У меня будет. I will have. У меня будет. Or you will have. You will have. У тебя будет. У тебя будет. One more time. In the future tense, we use only one way. And this way looks and sounds exactly like this. Only like this. У меня будет. Or у тебя будет. Or he will have. He will have. У него будет. У него будет. У него будет. She will have. У нее будет. У нее будет. They will have. У них будет. У них будет. Or you will have. You will have. I mean for some people. У вас будет. У вас будет. And we will have. We will have. У нас будет. У нас будет. Okay? And next I'll explain to you everything about these versions of the verb in the future tense with different examples. For example, I will have a child in the future. For example, you decided to share with your parents, with your friends, with very interesting and happy news that in the future you will have a child, yes, and you could tell your parents, your friend, this kind of Russian sentence like I will have a child. We translate into Russian like у меня будет ребенок. У меня будет ребенок. I will have a child. У меня будет ребенок. У меня будет ребенок. Or I will have a car. У меня будет машина. You decided to buy a car. Yes. I will have a car. У меня будет машина. У меня будет дом. House, I mean. I will have a house. У меня будет дом. У меня будет квартира. And so on. Different examples. Next example, for example, like a question. Will you have the time to meet with me? Will you have the time to meet with me in the future on the street, on the coffee, in the restaurant, and so on? У тебя будет время встретиться со мной? Will you have the time to meet with me? У тебя будет время встретиться со мной? У тебя будет время встретиться со мной? У тебя будет время встретиться со мной? Or not? Yes? Next question, next example. У него, I mean, he will have the opportunity to do it. He will have the opportunity to do it. We translate into Russian like у него будет возможность сделать это. He will have the opportunity to do it. У него будет возможность сделать это. У него будет возможность сделать это. Oh, by the way, I forgot to share with you with different examples if we're talking about one thing or two things, and I will back to last examples. For example, if we're talking about two things, I mean, I will have a child. How we will change this sentence if we will talk about two things. For example, two children. We can say like у меня будут дети. У меня будут дети. What did I change? What did I change? I changed this word. Будет. Because if we're talking about two things, three things, I mean several things, not about one child. We're talking about several children. That's why I use this word. У меня будут дети. У меня будут дети. Or I will have the cars. Several cars. That's why I use у меня будут машины. У меня будут машины. Or у меня будут дома. Or у меня будут квартиры. And so on. I just decided to share with you this example just you to understand how this word будет will change, and it depends if you're talking about one thing, one child, one car, one house, one apartment, and if we're talking about several things, children, cars, houses, apartments, I mean дети, машины, дома, квартиры, and so on. And the same situation with this example. У тебя будет время встретиться со мной? У тебя будет время встретиться со мной? For example, I can share with you this kind of example like у тебя будут, for example, will you have the opportunities to meet with me? Will you have the opportunities to meet with me? У тебя будут возможности встретиться со мной. У тебя будут возможности встретиться со мной. As you see, I also changed this word. Будет. Word будет we use if we talk about one thing. Время. One thing. If we talk about several things like opportunities. Возможности. We change this word, and this word looks and sounds like будут. У тебя будут возможности встретиться со мной, and so on. So I hope you understood it, because maybe it's quite difficult for you if you only started to learn Russian, but I hope you understood. So, and go next. У него будет возможность сделать это. The same situation. If you're talking about several things, he will have the opportunities сделать это. Opportunities to do it. У него будут возможности сделать это. He will have the opportunities to do it. У него будут возможности сделать это. The same situation. If you're talking about one thing, one opportunity, we use this version like будет. У него будет. У него будет. If we're talking about several things, several opportunities, we use this version like у него будут. У него будут. У него будут возможности сделать это. So go next. For example, she will have a daughter. She will have a daughter. У нее будет дочь. У нее будет дочь. By the way, you can use not only this version like дочь, also you can say like дочка, дочка. It's the same word and the meaning of these these words are the same. Native Russian speakers use and this version wherever. You can use in your Russian speech all these two types of the word дочь or дочка. У нее будет дочка. Or she will have the children's. She will have the children. Yes. У нее будут дети. Why I changed this word будут? Because we're talking about several things. Children, дети. That's why I use this version like у нее будут. У нее будут. Please remember it. And maybe if you have your workbook, please write after me, write behind me all these examples. Next example. For example, they will have a lot time. No, they will have lots of time to think it over. They will have lots of time think it over. I'll explain, I will translate it into Russian like у них будет много времени обдумать это. They will have lots of time to think it over. У них будет много времени обдумать это. By the way, it's very interesting and helpful phrase, Russian phrase for you, because native, I mean English phrase like think it over, we translate into Russian like обдумать это. Okay, go next. Or they will have children. У них будут дети. They will have the children. У них будут дети. The same situation, I changed this word because we're talking about one thing. But if you're talking about several things, some things, we use this version like у них будут. У них будут дети. And so on. Next example. If you're talking about people, I mean some persons, yes, you will have an opportunities. No, you will have an opportunity. У вас будет возможность. Or you will have a chance. У вас будет шанс. But if you're talking about several chances, yes, у вас будут шансы. Or you will have the opportunities, возможности. What I mean, as you see, I also changed this word from будет to будут, because we're talking about several things. Шансы or возможности. Okay? And also what I need to tell you about this version in the future tense, because if we want to translate it literally, yes, not like I will have, we translate into Russian like у меня будет. Of course, we can translate it into Russian like я буду иметь. Я буду иметь. And you should know that we don't use this version very often. I think even we use it very rarely and seldom. That's why I advise you to use exactly this version, like у меня будет, or у тебя будет. Because у тебя будет, we can translate it literally like я буду иметь. Я буду иметь. Because you can you can meet this kind of version я буду иметь in their different Russian books or from some native Russian speaker and so on. Or у него будет, we can face like он будет иметь. Yes. Or она будет иметь. Or I mean они будут иметь. Yes. Or вы будете иметь. Or мы будем иметь. I hope you understand it. But so I didn't share with you with this kind of example. For example, у нас будет and something. Okay, sorry for that. We will have the children. У нас будут дети. We will have the children. У нас будут дети. If you're talking about one thing. У нас будет ребенок. We will have a child. We will have a child. У нас будет ребенок. У нас будет ребенок. Okay, go next. Next, I will explain to you everything about this Russian verb in the past tense. Past tense. What I mean? Native Russian speakers use this Russian verb иметь in the past tense with this kind of version, like, for example, I had we translate into Russian like у меня был. I had, у меня был. But you should know. Let me give you this kind of instructions. Like, for example, у меня был, I had, у меня был. У меня был we translate in this version if we talking about one thing. Okay, one thing. If we talk about several things, some things, yes, we translate it like у меня были. Because we're talking about several things. У меня были several things. I mean, maybe two things. Yes, two things, three things, and so on. If we're talking about feminine gender, for example, I had a car because car has a feminine gender. We use this kind of version like у меня была. It's a feminine gender. Okay, feminine gender. Or if you're talking about masculine gender, we use this kind of version like у меня был. Masculine gender. У меня был. As you see, if you're talking about one thing, like у меня был, and if you're talking about masculine gender, we use the same version, like у меня был, and here also we have у меня был. Next, if we're talking about this kind of English sentence like you have, we translate into Russian like у тебя был. У тебя был we use when we're talking about one thing. One more time, у тебя был. If we're talking about two things, У тебя были. У тебя были. If we're talking about feminine gender, у тебя была. You had a car. You had a car. У тебя была машина. У тебя была машина. It's a feminine gender. And one more time, if we're talking about masculine gender, у тебя был. У тебя был. Okay? У тебя был. Next, for example, he had. У него был. У него был, if we're talking about one thing. У него был one thing. У него были. У него были, if we're talking about two things, or three things, or four things, and so on. У него была, if we're talking about feminine gender. У него была. У него была. He had a car. У него была машина. У него была машина. And у него был, if we're talking about feminine gender. Next. She had. У нее был, if we're talking about one thing. She had. У него, у нее были. У нее были, if we're talking about two things. Two things. У нее была, if we're talking about feminine gender. And у нее был, if we're talking about masculine gender. Next. They had. У них был. The same situation. One thing. У них были. If you're talking about two things or three things. У них была. Feminine gender. And у них был. One more time. Masculine gender. Next. We had. У нас был. The same situation. One thing. У нас были. If you're talking about two things, three things. У нас была. Feminine gender. Yes. And у нас был. Masculine gender. Or if you're talking about people, some people, yes. You had. У вас был. One thing. У вас были. Two things. У вас была. This is the feminine gender. У вас была. And у вас был. This is the masculine gender. Sorry, I'm a little bit tired. У вас был. And different examples. For example, I had a very interesting lesson. I had a very interesting lesson. У меня был очень интересный урок. I had a very interesting lesson. У меня был очень интересный урок. Or у меня были очень, I had the very interesting lessons. У меня были очень интересные уроки. I had very interesting lessons. У меня были очень интересные уроки. He had a very... He had a perfect day. He had a perfect day. У него был прекрасный день. У него был прекрасный день. He had a perfect day. Or he had He had the chance. He had the chance. У него был шанс. He had the chances. Шансы. У него был. Here we put this letter because we're talking about two things, two chances. Yes, for example. Next. They had a chance. У них был шанс. У них был шанс. Or they had the cars. У них были машины. У них были машины. They had the cars. У них были машины. У них были машины. Or we have an apartment. We had an apartment. У нас была квартира. У нас была квартира. We had the apartments. У нас были квартиры. У нас были квартиры. Next examples. I had something with the feminine gender. I had a car. I had a car. У меня была машина. У меня была машина. And with different examples. So just remember, if you wrote behind me all these examples, so what I told you right now, all these rules, how we use this Russian verb in different examples, it depends on the feminine gender, masculine gender, if you're talking about one thing or two things and so on. Please use these examples, use these rules in your Russian speech. It's very important if you want to sound like a real native Russian speaker. So I hope that you understood everything. If you didn't understand something, you can rewatch this video, because I think that this video was interesting, helpful, but at the same time difficult, I think so, because as for me, please forgive me that I didn't explain to you with something clearly, yes, for you, because it's really sometimes it's very difficult to explain to you different Russian rules if you only started to learn Russian. But please, I hope that you liked it, and if you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel, put like, and bye bye.